Ralph Offenhouse wants a copy of the Wall Street Journal. LQ Sonny Clemens just wants a martini straight up with olives. And Lieutenant Worf walks into a door. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk. Today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1, Episode 25, the final episode of the first season, entitled The Neutral Zone. Story by, this one's a little strange, Deborah McIntyre and Mona Clee. Teleplay by Maurice Hurley, and television story by Maurice Hurley. That's kind of a new one. This one is directed by, of course, James L. Conway, and we have a very special guest. Legendary director, Mr. James L. Conway is joining us. Thank you so much for joining us, Jamie. So good to see you again.
Nice to be back.
Also, very special thanks to Grandpa One, aka Tim Baum, for sponsoring this entire first season. Thank you very much. This was May 14th, 1988. Where were you? So first things first, Jamie, I just got to know, this was the final episode of season 1. I'm assuming in production order, this was still the final episode. Do you remember looking back 35 years? Do you remember if there was a buzz? Was there some stress about maybe there won't be a second episode? Were people getting senioritis? What was the feel at that time?
It was a little complicated for a couple of reasons. One, there was another writer's strike. There was a writer's strike on when we made this episode. And it started shortly about the time I was doing prep, so that I never had any rewrites on the script we got. There was some production. I don't know who made them, but on a show that had rewrites and rewrites and rewrites all the time, this one did not. The script we got handed was pretty much the script we shot. So if there wasn't a writer's strike, I'm not sure what things would have been addressed or not.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. The crew's morale and the cast morale was great. It wasn't official that the show was getting picked up. Nobody knew for sure. The studio knew, but they hadn't shared it yet. I think they were sort of keeping things close to their chest, and they decided what to do about different contractual things that they had to deal with. But the actors didn't. But everybody was in pretty good spirits, tired. But overall, it was a fun shooting the show.
Wow, that answered a huge question that I had.
Totally.
Because not having rewrites, usually when they're watching the dailies and they're going to kind of tweak things to get more juice out of the story, maybe bring more drama to a scene, and it felt like this was like the first draft, or because for a final episode, this is a season finale. I was expecting, I guess, more action per se. I was expecting more action, maybe battle scene, or I was expecting more. And I guess you're handcuffed in this instance because you can't get anything more than whatever is handed to you at this time, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's right. All they could do is, and with production changes, and even those couldn't be made by Writers Guild members. And I'm a Writers Guild member, and I was back then, so I was very particular to make sure that it was adhered to. And watching it, I watched it again yesterday. The story of the three people that are rescued is pretty much each has their own arc, and each is kind of nice. That all worked all right, but the whole Romulan story was like a non-starter. You had all this build up, and then it just was a big tease about what might come, but there was no conflict when there could have been. There could have been a lot more to milk there. It was interesting how it was all just sort of fizzled out at the end.
It's funny you say that. That's exactly what I was thinking when watching it was, hey, this is the Romulans we haven't seen in 50 years, they say. It's tense. They don't know what to do. They're a little worried. They're a little stressed. Is this aggressive? What's going on? How do we handle this? And then it was just kind of a few, it had a few good lines when they say, we are back. Okay, that's big. That's good. That sets up the second season. But it did feel slightly incomplete, whereas the three characters here seems like more of a standard Star Trek episode, where you learn about the characters of the week and they have their arcs, and they all had very different personalities. They all handled the situation differently. It was fun to follow and fun to watch, but that part seemed much more fleshed out. It seemed like they really worked that out completely. I wonder if the Romulan thing could have just been a different episode.
Well, they was setting up something for season 2 because, and I don't remember exactly. I'm sure it was dealt with at the beginning of season 2. I don't remember, but it in the balance, it seems like the three people stories should have been the subplot.
Yeah,
one of three plots. The Romulans being the A plot, and then some personal character crew member story for the B plot. And there was nothing with the characters at all in this with our regulars. It was just those three and the Romulans sort of as an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote the same thing in my notes. Because of the way the Romulan situation turned out, it seemed to be two B plots instead of an A plot and a B plot. This episode felt like I was watching two B plots, and I was waiting for, some climax, some action, something bigger than what I got, and that's why I felt let down on both plots essentially. They had great story ideas though. They, the coming up, talking about cryogenics, for example, and talking about the Romulans, another thing that we want to talk about. Like those things are interesting for me as a viewer, but just not the way it was approached in this particular script.
And something that occurred to me when I watched it yesterday was the idea of the cryogenics, and that you die and you go to sleep, and now you're suddenly brought back to life 300 years later. You never really think about the people who do that and what would happen if they got brought back. So there was a lot to really dig into there. I wasn't sure they really got into the whole, what do you mean I'm alive in 300 years? And because nobody knew back then in 1988 how visual the internet would be and how visual our world would be. The computers were so primitive that they used, and they talked to the computer, and you only went to the screen once for that weird picture of her grandson who looks just like her dad, or her great grandson looks like her husband. But these days, if we were making that show, it would all be screens. There'd be screens everywhere. There'd be all these incredibly advanced videos. But who knew that 35 years ago where we would be today?
Something I noticed straight away from the very beginning, I feel like it was the first minute, there was a moment, it was a camera shot, it's like a camera move. We're looking at the bridge, and Worf is in his new station, and Data is behind him. Data turns around to walk towards Worf to meet him at Tactical. And the camera, when Worf is first talking, the camera's like this. When Data stands next to him, the camera pulls in, and I think it was more than just closing in on him, but it felt like it actually moved forward. And I don't know if you remember that shot, and I was just kind of curious about if you were more of a stagnant camera shot kind of person, or if you like to, as a director, if you like to experiment with shots, or if this was just the DPs doing this and you say that looks great.
It would have been a dolly push in, and I was always my camera always moved when possible. In early days of Star Trek first season, it was more difficult because of the blue screens. The camera was bolted down. I mean, literally, it was a Mitchell, old-fashioned Mitchell with 3-pin pull down, and they had to put the tripod legs down and then attach them to the stage floor, trying to get rid of any vibration because the blue screen. And this was just 1988 technology. I didn't come back again until season 5, I think, of Next Generation. By then it was much looser. Technology had improved a lot, but the camera moves were much more limited. Whenever you were on the bridge and there was a blue screen involved, you had strict rules you had to follow. So that might have been one of the reasons there was less there. And also those sets weren't as big as they got, and the equipment got smaller, so you could move around much easier as the years went by. But my personal style was to move the camera all the time, whenever possible.
Yeah, I had a similar question about just the framing of shots in the room where they were having the meeting. There was the space was being kind of flying by in the background, and then there was a solo shot of Picard where he just had space behind him, and I actually liked that shot. But my question about that shot is, I remember on Deep Space Nine we had that black velvet curtain that had the little tiny mirror dots on it.
Right.
And it really kind of just moved really slowly, or appeared to move slowly,
It
but
moved.
and it was the backdrop though, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like the warp speed backdrop which we had in this shot. And I wanted to ask you, was that a green screen shot that you used for that, or how did you guys do that?
Yes, that would have been a green screen, or I think it was a blue screen in the early days.
Okay.
But yes, it was a green screen out the window, and again, you had the camera had to be locked down. Now, I think all those visual effects were redone when they redid the episodes for DVD. That's why I think all of including those, I think were redone. I think the miniatures were redone, because I know they redid special effects when they did some of the DVD reissues. And those did not look like the original effects to me. I could be wrong, but I thought they looked a lot better than I thought they would have for 1988.
I thought so too, actually. I thought the way the lines were moving in the background seemed a little more modern than the time period.
You know what else looked really modern too? Sorry, Cirroc, just real quick, was that opening scene, that opening shot of the floating little space station thing. I was like, every once in a while we get something in this first season of The Next Generation where I say, this does not look like 1988 or 1987. This looks like 2000 or 98 or 99. Like sometimes I'm kind of, and maybe I'm insulting the 80s, but when I think 80s, I think kind of crappy stuff, like visually, because technology's improved so much, and we're used to like these movies from the 80s where you're like, okay, that's fake. But every once in a while, like you see something in this first season where you're like, this looks really good. And so, Jamie, it might be, like you said, that it kind of got remastered a little bit.
They remastered, and I think they actually redid a bunch of effects. I know somebody I could ask to find out, but I think it did look, if it looked that good in 88, it was way ahead of its time.
Amazing. But anyway, sorry I interrupted you there, Cirroc. That's just something that really blew me away.
Yeah, do you recall the budget being bigger for this episode because it's a season finale, or was it just standard procedure at this point?
There was no action. I mean, the reason that you had bigger budgets was because you had big fights, or you went on location, or not in this case. This was like essentially a bottle show. So no, there was it was a regular 7-day show.
Now, something you mentioned a few minutes ago, Jamie. Sorry, I know we're hitting you with a lot of questions, but we have so many questions for you, especially because, as you mentioned, you pretty much, after these 2 episodes of The Next Generation, you kind of were away from Star Trek for about 5 years. Right? You came back in 93 to do a Next Generation episode, as well as right around that same time frame, maybe a little bit later, a few months later, you did the season 1 Deep Space Nine episode Duet, which many people say is the best episode of season 1 by a long shot. What were you doing in that time? I do see that you worked a lot still on IMDb. You had a lot of work. And when you came back in 93, did it feel like, I'm back home? Or were there just so many changes that you didn't recognize it?
Well, besides being a director, I'm also a writer. And I left in 88. I was the supervising producer, head writer on a show called Paradise, which was a Western. Lee Horsley played a gunfighter who adopted 3 kids. That went for 3 seasons on CBS. So that was 3 seasons in a row. And that's, all 9 months. That was a full-time job, because I was writing it and producing it and directing it. Wow. And then from after that, I did a TV series. I was at Warner Brothers with the same producer called Bodies of Evidence for 2 seasons. And that actually was George Clooney starred in it. He was it's a funny story. The reason George Clooney is a star is because Les Moonves, who was the president of Warner Brothers at the time, believed in George and put him under a contract, a contract for the studio. And he kept putting him in things. He put him in our show, and then he put him in Sisters, and then finally he put him in ER, and he broke out on ER. So the reason, and George, when we done Bodies of Evidence, had been on like 15 failed pilots. So the reason that George finally had a chance to break out, and he's an incredible guy, I love him, and he was a wonderful guy to work with, was because Les believed in him, and then he finally broke out on ER. So anyway, I did those two shows, Paradise and Bodies of Evidence, and 5 years has gone by. And now I'm available again. I call Rick and I say, I'm available. I'd love to come back to Star Trek. And he says, great. He called me back the next day. I had my episode. I went and I directed it. And it was like coming back home again. I mean, it was wonderful to see everybody. It was a different crew, the camera crew. All the other crew members were the same. Cast was the same and wonderful. And a very warm welcome, a great script with Jonathan, being featured so much. We had a great time. And because Rick liked my work again, he gave me the Deep Space Nine, and that led to so many more episodes, between Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise before the show ended.
18 in total.
And during all of those, I would come and go. I left for a while, and I went to do a show called University Hospital and Burke's Law, and then I came back, and finally I actually became executive vice president of Spelling Television when I left doing all the Deep Space Nines. And Rick contacted me 2 years later to offer me the Enterprise pilot. And luckily, Spelling was owned by Paramount, so I was able to go to Aaron Spelling and say, I've been offered this pilot for Star Trek. Would you let me go do it? And he said yes. So that worked out.
Well, that leads me to my next question. One is, you were dealing with Rick Berman a lot. Was Gene Roddenberry actively involved with you during this first season of Next Generation?
Yes, during Justice, he was very involved. That was only episode 5 or 6, and
that sounds about right.
And he did the final draft of the script, and that script is very much a Gene Roddenberry original series show. So he was, and I loved him. He was great. And then I didn't get to work with him on the last one very much because of the writer's strike. Technically, he wasn't able to, render any writing services. So he was around, but he wasn't able to do what he did on the first one we did together.
And that leads me to my next question, which is stylistically between Roddenberry and Rick Berman or Aaron Spelling. I really want to know, what kind of differences do you see in the way that they run their empires, the Aaron Spelling / Roddenberry kind of stylistically?
Well, let me start with Roddenberry. He was a writer-producer, and he had a very specific vision, which he saw through the original series and then continued to Next Generation. So it was really his vision, and he was very specific about it. And that was good, because you knew exactly it was a good vision and a lot of fun, and you knew what you wanted to do. Aaron, who was also a writer-producer, he started as a writer. He had such a wide range of television shows, from Charlie's Angels to Starsky and Hutch to Matt Houston to Hotel to Love Boat, all different styles. And he was a master of high concept and casting. And to him, he loved the casting process. He was great at it. And he could smell a high concept show that he thought would be a hit. His taste was very much in sync with America's taste at the time. So he just churned out hit after hit after hit. He always had control, but he let the showrunners run with the day-to-day operation. Though he read every script, he was involved in the casting of every show. He was very hands-on.
Jamie, something I'm noticing when we're talking with you right now is we ask you a question. You don't think about it very long. You answer it with certainty. You're very clear-headed. Your thought process is quick. And I'm wondering if that must have been something that made you very attractive as a director when people are looking to work under time constraints, major time constraints and deadlines. Do you
and
think,
as an executive running
Yeah.
Spelling's productions,
do you think
not
that
just
was
the director.
one of the big things that Star Trek, saw in you, the why they kept calling you back is you knew what you wanted, you were quick with it, you were certain. That's really important in a leadership role.
Yeah, there are two things. As a director, I prepared completely. So I had my whole shot list worked out. When we went to the set, I knew exactly what I wanted. And I would go, we'd rehearse it. I'd sort of put them where I want. The actors would have ideas. We'd get it blocked. They'd light it. And then when we started shooting, I'd go, if I liked it, cut print over here, cut print over here. No wasted time in between. No long discussions after takes. So you got a lot done. And I tended to accomplish more in a day than other directors did. And to your other question, yes, I'm very decisive, and I think quickly. So when people ask a question, and there's a lot of people asking you questions when you're a director, and if your ability is to answer boom, 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 and answer correctly, hopefully, and still be collaborative, it can really work to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were a few things that jumped out to me as maybe signs of the time for this episode. One of them was the music accents for the comedy moments.
Yeah.
When, for example, when the woman wakes up from her cryogenic sleep and sees Worf's face and falls back down, there was a, wah, wah, yeah. And I thought to myself, they don't do that anymore. That's very typical of the time period,
Right.
So I wanted to ask you about if you were involved in some of those decisions, or they do those in post and you're not really there for those moments. I know it's a time period thing, so they like to hit comedy notes and those at that time period. And then the other question I had for you was about lighting. One of our executive producers, Jason
Okun,
Jason Okun always talks about the lighting on the set and sometimes seeing reflections of lighting. And I noticed that in this episode, in one particular shot on the bridge, there was a reflection of a light that I know had been placed somewhere for the purpose of lighting the set and the actors. What kind of improvements were made over time to reduce the amount of those kinds of light reflections?
To answer your second question first, the way they solved it on The Next Generation is whoops, sorry. Turn that off. Okay. Sorry about that. Hey, now it's that. Wait a minute, I'll get it there. Okay, done. Sorry. So they replaced the director of photography. So you had a new DP on season 2 who changed the philosophy of the lighting. Season 1 was very traditional, a lot of hard lights. Those are harder to disguise, I think. It takes longer to light. And those are big sets to light. And I believe it was, I can't remember who came in the second year, if it was Marvin or if it was Jonathan West, but they just changed the lighting style.
It was Marvin, yeah.
Yeah, Marvin. So there was more soft light, and that was one thing. I don't remember the reflection thing that much as an issue, but that was that. In terms of the music, the direct episodic directors, you once you finish shooting, you go in with the editor and you put together your director's cut. So it's going to be shown to the producers the way I intended it, and then that's it. You're done. You have no more involvement in any of the post production. The producers change what they want. They do the music. You're allowed to come to the mix if you want to. Nobody does. That's different when I did a pilot for Enterprise, where I was involved in everything all the way. But an episodic director's job ends when you turn over your director's cut. It's really a producer's medium from that point on.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed the music as well, but especially during the tense moments, there was like almost like the piano, the keys playing almost like a tingling kind of feeling, and it kind of jumped out at me. And again, this, like Cirroc said, this felt very much like something they used to do, where the music is almost a character of its own in a way. Like it kind of stands out, making it more scary, and it's more prominent. And I should have looked up who it was that did the scoring. I don't know if you remember, but was that something, Jamie, that you would ever picture in your mind when you're directing? Like, oh, it'd be nice if there was this kind of music, I'll see if I can suggest that later. Or was that just totally, that's their thing, this is my thing? Was it like a totally separate kind of department?
In this show, I never thought about music at all. Other shows at the time were incorporating rock music and things throughout the episodes. It was just becoming vogue. So you'd always keep an eye on, what you might want to do musically in contemporary music to like a detective show or something, but not in this case. And back in those days, every score was done by a 20 or 30 piece orchestra. They would gather every week to do an episode, and there were these big orchestras that would come in and do it. Now it's all done on the synthesizer, but it was a huge deal. I mean, you'd have 20, 30 orchestra people in there, and they'd be scoring all these TV shows. It was quite remarkable.
It was Ron Jones again. I just looked it up. That guy was just freaking amazing.
Yeah, he did a lot of work on the show. Do you recall any interaction with Maurice Hurley? We've seen his name come up a lot. He's always on the credits, and he's obviously credited for this teleplay. But I don't know if you had any interaction with him specifically because he was on strike for this episode.
I did a lot on the first episode, and I'm sure he was there in a producer capacity, not writing when I was there. But I liked Maurice. He was a really nice guy. A lot of energy, a lot of good ideas. It was funny. And I don't know if he left the show that year or the next year. I can't remember, but he was a good guy.
And we only have you for another minute here, Jamie. Really appreciate you taking the time today. But before you go on that subject, can you tell us what that means when what was it called? Television story by Maurice Hurley. We've seen obviously teleplay by, we get it, story by, we get it. When they say written by, it's a combination of both. But television, Maurice Hurley was television story and teleplay by. I don't understand that. Do you have any idea?
Unless the screenplay was originally based on a short story or maybe a novelization that they borrowed it from, and it was written by those first two people you mentioned. I don't know. I don't remember the history. Let's see what it says. It says story. I'm looking at the credits here. Story by Deborah McIntyre and Mona Clee. I don't know if they were on staff or what the deal is with them. Let me just see here.
Yeah, this is the first time we've seen television story by as a credit for Maurice Hurley.
Somebody may have submitted, in those days, the writing staffs were smaller and you would freelance, and especially Star Trek, people would come in and pitch ideas. So it may have been an idea that was pitched and they turned in a story, but there was nothing usable except the idea. So Maurice redid the story and then did the teleplay, and that was how it was arbitrated. That's all I can imagine.
Yeah. Or it could have also been an idea for a book or something that wasn't meant for the TV episode, but they maybe stole it from there. But I did like the concepts. I thought they came up, once again, this first season of Next Generation, they come up with really good themes to touch upon. They just don't fully execute, in hindsight, what we know now, the topics that they could highlight on. I believe there's just moments there where you see, oh, this is a great idea. Cryogenics. I would love to know more about waking up from a cryogenic sleep. But
along those lines, nobody in the cast talked about it or speculated about it. They never made it personal to them. It was just three people, and in terms of modern writing, that would never happen. You have that happen, and somehow it would have to impact on your main characters or influence the story somewhere. But it never did.
It never did, except for just walking on the bridge or something like that, but it wasn't like a real intersection of storyline.
And that was weird too when Peter Mark Mitchman comes on the set and suddenly becomes part of the negotiation.
Yeah. It's like, who let this guy in?
I recognize that actor so much, but I could not place what I knew him from. I'm sure he's been in a ton of stuff.
A ton of things. He was one of these guest star of the week actors, very reliable, always on probably hundreds of shows. And then what's his name? Who was one of the Romulans was obviously.
Mark
I was wondering.
Yeah.
Yes, Cirroc, you caught that voice, right?
I caught it. You can't miss Mark Alimo. He's such a fine actor. He's just the way he pronounces things. It's his enunciation, the voice, the way he commands respect and challenges Picard. He is a very good adversary for a main character in a show.
Yeah, he was great.
I wonder if he's ever not played a villain or antagonist. I feel like he's only been like he knows what he can do. Like he's the bad guy and he's one of the best at it.
One thing that I always had to do is I always wanted to meet these actors without their makeup. So I either tried to see them before or after, just so I know what they really look like, because the change is remarkable sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Jamie, we really appreciate you taking the time today. It was so great seeing you again. We hope to see you again sometime soon, maybe for a duet or something like that. But, if Star Trek calls you now and says, you say hello, they say, hey, this is so-and-so from Star Trek. Hello, Mr. Conway. Can I call you Jamie? And you say, no. And they say, well, we'd love to have you direct an episode for us. What do you say? You say yes, or do you say, I'm done? I'm tired.
Probably the only show I would come back and do again would be Star Trek. So I'd say yes.
Oh,
that's so cool.
All right. You heard it, guys.
Yeah.
We gotta get to work on the keyboards and make it happen. Make it so.
Warriors.
Yeah, make it so.
Anyway, thank you so much, Jamie. 18 episodes you've directed on 4 Star Trek series, and you've been a producer, a writer, and a director on countless other shows. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Thank you so much. Everybody at home, stick around. We've got a lot more on the 7th Rule. We're going to be covering more of this episode. We'll be right back.